I walked into court expecting humiliation, because my own parents hired a lawyer to bankrupt me in front of everyone and hand my company to my brother like a prize. They weren't asking for help, they were trying to erase me on paper, with forged signatures and calm voices that sounded certain. If the judge believed them, my business would freeze, my employees would lose jobs, and my name would be stained permanently. Then the judge paused and asked one question that changed everything. I didn't grow up in a broken home, and that's the part people never understand when I tell them how this happened. From the outside, my family looked polished, comfortable, safe. The kind of family neighbors pointed at and said, "They've got it figured out." My father ran a long-established financial business in Boston, the kind built on handshakes, reputation, and legacy. He loved structure, discipline, predictability. My mother loved appearances, perfect dinners, perfect smiles, and perfect timing for tears, the kind of tears that made other people rush to comfort her even when she was the one doing damage. And then there was my brother, Marcus, older by 3 years, the heir, the one everyone expected to step into my father's world without ever questioning whether he wanted it or deserved it. I was the other one. Not a rebel in a loud way. I didn't slam doors. I didn't scream. I just didn't fit the story they had written. While Marcus talked about portfolios and networking dinners, I was fascinated by systems, by how things broke, how they could be protected, how unseen threats moved through the world and took down people who thought they were untouchable. I remember one night at dinner, I tried to explain an idea, sketching on a napkin while the roast cooled. I was talking fast, excited, full of energy because for once I thought they might see me. My father watched for a minute, then smiled the way you smile at a child pretending to run a business with play money. "That's a phase," he said. "You'll grow out of it." My mother laughed lightly and changed the subject like my interest was an inconvenience in the room. Those moments piled up over the years until they became a pattern. Holidays where Marcus was praised for things he hadn't even finished yet. Conversations that stopped the second I walked into the room. Compliments that always came with conditions like a leash. "You're smart, but you're talented, if only. You could do well as long as you stop trying to do it your way." And slowly, without anyone ever saying it out loud, the rules became clear. Marcus was the future, my father's legacy, my mother's pride. And I was the extra, the one who would eventually come around, settle down, and stop trying to be different. So when I left, it wasn't dramatic. No final argument, no shouting match, no ultimatum. Just distance. I married James, took his last name, and built something quietly, intentionally, without announcing it to anyone who had spent years telling me I'd fail. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't easy. There were years when my entire world fit inside a cramped apartment, and a laptop balanced on a folding table. Years when the coffee was always cold because it took too long to drink it, when the nights were too short, when the fear of failing sat in the room with me like another person. I missed events. I skipped vacations. I learned how to survive on focus and stubbornness. I learned how to make decisions without applause. And most importantly, I learned that my peace depended on how little my family knew. So I didn't tell them. I didn't correct their assumptions. When Marcus joked that I was still figuring things out, I let him. When my mother asked too sweetly if I was okay financially, I said I was fine and left it there. It felt safer, like keeping a door closed in a house where you know a storm is coming. For years, silence protected me. I kept my name off headlines. I avoided posting anything that hinted at scale or momentum. I built a company that provided specialized security and risk services for businesses that didn't want surprises, the kind of work where discretion isn't just preference, it's policy. Success arrived the way real success often does, not with fireworks, but with quiet confirmations. A contract renewed without negotiation. Client who stopped asking if and started asking how soon. A new hire who looked at me like their rent and groceries depended on my steadiness. Because they did. And I took that seriously. People trusted me with their livelihoods. I refused to let ego ruin what discipline built. So I stayed quiet. I thought that would keep me safe. I didn't realize silence was also buying my family time to decide what they thought I deserved once they noticed I had built something valuable. Because the first sign that they had noticed wasn't congratulations. It wasn't pride. It was a change in their attention, a sharpening. Marcus started calling, not directly at first. Little messages slipped into group chats. Comments during holidays. Heard tech is volatile right now. Must be stressful not having stability. Always said with a smile, always framed as concern. But his eyes were measuring. My father started asking questions too, but not about me, about risk, about liability, about whether people like me understood consequences. It felt like they were circling an invisible fence line, trying to see where it ended. My mother suddenly wanted updates. She asked if I'd consider coming back more often, reconnecting, maybe even talking to my father about opportunities. The word opportunities made my stomach twist because it didn't sound like an invitation. It sounded like an assessment. Then there was a dinner, the kind of dinner that looks normal from the outside but feels wrong in your bones while it's happening. Marcus made an offhand comment about hearing that I'd finally landed something decent. He said it like a joke, but his eyes didn't laugh. They searched my face, waiting for confirmation, waiting to measure how big my life had gotten without him noticing. I changed the subject. That night, I told James something didn't feel right. He didn't dismiss it. He'd seen the shape of this before, not the details, but the pattern, the way curiosity turns into entitlement when certain people realize you might have something they didn't approve of earning. 2 weeks later, the envelope arrived. Thick, official, my name printed too cleanly on the front. I remember standing in the hallway with my keys still in my hand, staring at it like it might move if I looked away. When I opened it, the words didn't register all at once. Bankruptcy petition. Creditor. Amount owed. Rounded numbers that looked confident on the page. And there it was, Marcus's name, sitting in the documents like it belonged. They claimed my company owed him nearly $2 million. Payments I had defaulted on. Bills I had ignored. Agreements I had supposedly signed years ago. The tone wasn't angry. That was the part that scared me. It was calm, methodical, written to sound inevitable. This wasn't a threat. It was an execution plan. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I sat down at the kitchen table and read it again, slower, line by line, letting the cold truth settle in. They weren't asking questions anymore. They had made a decision, and they were about to force me to answer it in court. I called my lawyer and told her exactly what was in front of me. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause on the line just long enough for me to brace myself. They're trying to force a bankruptcy process, she said finally. Not because it will hold up, but because it creates noise, delays, doubt. They want to freeze you, scare your clients, and make your employees question whether you're stable. So they know it's fake, I said, my voice low. Yes, she said. And they're counting on you reacting emotionally instead of strategically. That's when the weight of it landed fully. This wasn't Marcus acting alone in jealousy. This took coordination, time, approval. Someone had to decide this was acceptable. Someone had to nod and say, go ahead. I thought of my mother's careful silences, my father's obsession with punishment disguised as principle, the way they closed ranks when something threatened their story. I didn't need proof yet to know they were involved. I needed preparation. The next few days blurred into documents and confirmations, bank statements, contracts, audits, signed agreements that were real, correspondence that showed what actually happened. My lawyer asked for everything, and she didn't rush me because she wasn't panicking. That steadiness became my anchor. This only works if we let it, she told me. Truth survives pressure, but only if you show up with it. I didn't reach out to my parents. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't warn them. Silence wasn't protection anymore. It was strategy. If they wanted to paint me as reckless, I would show up controlled. If they wanted chaos, I would bring precision. And as the court date got closer, I made one decision that changed the entire outcome before anyone even walked into that room. I stopped trying to win their approval, and started preparing to expose them so clearly that the truth would be impossible to talk around. The first thing I did after that envelope was stop pretending this was family drama. This was business warfare using the court system as a weapon, and if I treated it emotionally, I'd lose on optics even if I won on facts. My lawyer told me that's exactly what they were betting on. They weren't just trying to win a case, they were trying to poison my reputation, freeze my operations, and scare the people who depended on me into walking away. A bankruptcy petition doesn't have to be true to do damage. Just has to be loud enough for long enough. So we built our response like we were building a wall, one layer at a time. I pulled every record I had, not the highlights, everything. Contracts, invoices, wire confirmations, tax filings, audited statements, internal ledgers, vendor agreements, email threads, calendars, even old meeting notes that proved where I was and what decisions were actually made in the years they claimed I signed their fake documents. I treated it like a forensic audit because that's what it was. My lawyer also made one thing clear. We were not going to argue about my character. We were going to prove their math and their signatures were lies. The difference matters. The moment you defend your character, you've already stepped into their trap. So we stayed in evidence. Cold, boring, undeniable evidence. While I was gathering records, my family's behavior shifted in a way that told me they were coordinating. Marcus stopped acting like a brother and started acting like a prosecutor. He didn't call to talk. He sent messages that felt like bait. Short, sharp lines that tried to pull a reaction out of me. I heard you've been stressed. I'm sure we can resolve this if you're reasonable. He used the word reasonable the way people use it when they're trying to take something and want you to feel guilty for resisting. My mother started calling more too, but she didn't talk about the petition directly. She talked around it. She asked how I was sleeping. James was okay. If work was a lot right now. It sounded caring, but the timing was too perfect, too strategic. She was gathering information, trying to find my weak spots. My father's approach was silence, which was its own message. He didn't argue. He didn't deny. He didn't ask questions. He let Marcus move in front while he stayed behind the curtain, the way he always did when he wanted something done without his fingerprints showing. I didn't respond to any of them. Not one message. Not one call. 'Cause I understood something that took me years to learn. When people move from love to entitlement, communication becomes a tool, not a bridge. They weren't reaching out to understand me. They were reaching out to control the narrative. My lawyer filed our initial response and requested specific disclosures, the kind that forces people to commit to their story under penalty. And that's when the pressure started to crack their confidence. Because when you're lying casually, you can improvise. When you're lying under legal scrutiny, every detail becomes a landmine. Meanwhile, I had to protect my company from the outside impact. I couldn't let clients hear bankruptcy through rumors before they heard stability from me. So I did what leaders do when the situation is ugly. I got ahead of it without oversharing. I called my top clients personally. I told them there was a frivolous legal filing from a family dispute, that it was being handled aggressively, and that operations were stable. I didn't plead. I didn't sound scared. I sounded like the person they hired because I handle threats calmly. Then I met with my team. I didn't sugarcoat it, but I also didn't dramatize it. I told them what was happening, what it meant, and what it didn't mean. Didn't mean layoffs. Didn't mean shutdown. It didn't mean panic. It meant we were dealing with a legal attack and we were going to keep doing our work while professionals handled the rest. I watched their faces while I spoke. People can smell uncertainty. So I gave them clarity. You could almost feel the room exhale. That night, when the office was quiet and James was asleep, the anger finally tried to surface. Not loud anger, the dangerous kind. The kind that asks, how could they do this to me? And why wasn't I worth basic decency? I didn't let it take over because anger makes you sloppy. And sloppiness is what liars rely on. Instead, I kept focusing on one truth. If they wanted to destroy me publicly, then I was going to make sure the public record showed exactly who tried to commit fraud and who showed up with facts. The closer we got to court, the more their behavior exposed their mindset. My mother started using guilt like currency. She left voicemails about family reputation. She hinted that I was hurting everyone by not cooperating. My brother's messages got sharper, more impatient, like he was frustrated that I wasn't falling into the role he expected. The role where I scramble and apologize and beg for mercy. My father finally sent one text. One sentence. "Don't make this worse than it needs to be." That line told me everything. To him, worse didn't mean wrong. Worse meant visible. Worse meant consequences that reach beyond the family and into the world where reputation actually matters. That was when I knew the courtroom wasn't just a risk. It was the moment their control would either hold or collapse. And we were ready. Because while they were betting on intimidation, we were building something they couldn't improvise against. Timeline, paper trail, and a signature analysis that would make their entire story fall apart the second it faced daylight. As the hearing date got closer, something subtle but important happened. The noise around me increased, but my internal world got quieter. That's how I knew I was doing this right. When you're reacting emotionally, everything feels urgent and loud. When you're grounded in truth, urgency fades and precision takes over. My lawyer and I met almost daily, not because things were spiraling, but because we were tightening the case. Every document we submitted was intentional. Every response was measured. We weren't trying to overwhelm the court. We were trying to corner the lie. The key was chronology. Fraud almost always collapses when you force it to exist in real time. Marcus claimed I'd taken loans during periods when my company records showed zero debt and growing reserves. He claimed missed payments during months where audited statements showed no such obligations existed. He claimed agreements signed on dates when travel records and emails placed me in completely different states. Lies can survive in isolation. They die in sequence. The signature analysis was the final nail, but we didn't lead with it. We let the story weaken first. Meanwhile, my family's behavior continued to confirm everything. Marcus started posturing publicly, dropping hints to mutual contacts that I was in trouble, and that things were complicated. It was reputation warfare, subtle but deliberate. He wanted doubt to spread before facts could catch up. My mother took the opposite approach. She played grief. She told people she was heartbroken and confused, and didn't know how things had gotten so bad. She positioned herself as collateral damage, the innocent parent caught between two stubborn children. It was effective with people who didn't know her well. My father stayed silent, which in our family meant approval. He let Marcus act, let my mother perform, and kept his hands clean. That dynamic was familiar. What was different this time was that I wasn't stepping in to absorb it. I wasn't correcting narratives. I wasn't smoothing relationships. I was letting their versions exist long enough to collide with reality. The week before court, my lawyer asked me a question that caught me off guard. She asked if I was prepared for what it would feel like when the truth landed. Not legally, emotionally. She told me that when people weaponize institutions against you, they often expect fear, submission, or collapse. What they're rarely prepared for is exposure. And exposure doesn't just affect outcomes. It affects identity. People who believe they're entitled to control you don't handle being seen clearly. I thought about that more than I expected. I realized this wasn't just about winning a case. It was about something much older. About the version of me my family had always relied on. The one who stayed quiet. The one who didn't embarrass them. The one who carried discomfort so they didn't have to. Court was going to strip that version away permanently. And they sensed it. The night before the hearing, my mother left another voicemail. This one wasn't angry or pleading. It was nostalgic. She talked about when I was younger, how proud they'd been, how things used to be easier. It was an attempt to pull me backward emotionally, to make me doubt my clarity by reminding me of a past that felt safer than the present. I didn't respond. Nostalgia is powerful, but it's also selective. It remembers comfort and forgets cost. I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because I wasn't nervous, but because I wasn't conflicted. By the time morning came, there was no part of me that wanted to run or fix or soften what was coming. I dressed simply, deliberately. No statement pieces. No armor disguised as confidence. Just myself. Calm, prepared, present. When we walked into the courthouse, I didn't look for my family. I didn't need to see their faces to know what they'd be wearing. Control, certainty, performance. They had built their entire plan on one assumption: that I would still behave like their daughter, not like a defendant with evidence. They assumed I'd explain myself, that I'd try to be understood, that I'd crumble under pressure. What they didn't account for was this: I had already survived losing them. There was nothing left they could threaten me with. And when you take that kind of leverage away from someone, all they're left with is the truth they tried to avoid. Walking into the courtroom felt less like entering a battle, and more like stepping onto a stage where the ending had already been written and no one else had read the script yet. I took my seat beside my lawyer and placed my hands flat on the table, not to steady myself, but to remind my body that I was here by choice. Across the room, my family arranged themselves exactly as expected. My mother positioned herself where the judge would see her first, shoulders slightly hunched, face composed into practiced concern. Marcus sat upright, confident, already projecting the role of the wronged party who had been forced into action. My father sat beside him, silent, arms crossed, the posture of a man who believes authority doesn't need to explain itself. None of them looked at me. That was intentional. Eye contact would have acknowledged me as an equal, and this case was built on the idea that I wasn't. When proceedings began, Marcus's attorney took the floor with rehearsed ease. He spoke about responsibility, obligation, and risk, framing the petition as a necessary intervention to prevent further damage. His language was careful, designed to sound reasonable rather than aggressive. He didn't accuse me outright. He implied. He described patterns instead of facts, painted pictures instead of timelines. That's how these things usually work. You don't need truth if you can manufacture concern. As he spoke, I noticed something important. He never once looked directly at the financial exhibits. He spoke around them. That told me everything. My mother followed, her voice soft, trembling just enough to signal pain without losing control. She said they had tried to help me, that they had believed in me, that watching me spiral had been devastating. Spiral. The word sat there unchallenged, heavy with assumption. My father nodded once when she finished. Just once. It was subtle, but it was endorsement. That nod carried years of hierarchy in it. Said this is how it is. This is how it's always been. When it was my lawyer's turn, she didn't stand immediately. She waited a beat longer than necessary, letting the silence stretch just enough to shift the energy in the room. Then she stood and spoke plainly. No emotion, no narrative, just sequence. She walked the court through dates first, then documents, then contradictions. She didn't argue. She aligned facts in a way that made argument irrelevant. She showed how the alleged debts overlapped with periods of documented profitability. She highlighted discrepancies in amounts, inconsistencies in timing, and most importantly, the absence of any legitimate transfer records. Each point was clean, each transition deliberate. I watched Marcus's confidence erode in real time, not dramatically, but visibly. His foot started tapping. His jaw tightened. He leaned toward his attorney more than once, whispering too urgently. My mother stopped crying. Her hands folded tightly in her lap, knuckles whitening. My father finally looked at me then, not with anger, but with something closer to disbelief. As if he were realizing too late that the version of me he had underestimated no longer existed. The judge listened without interruption, eyes moving steadily between documents and faces. When my lawyer finished, she didn't sit down immediately. She asked permission to submit one final exhibit. Signature analysis. Independent. Verified. She placed it on the bench without commentary. The judge reviewed it in silence. That silence was different from the earlier one. It wasn't neutral. It was evaluative. Marcus's attorney stood abruptly, objecting on procedural grounds, but the judge raised a hand without looking up. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, controlled, and unmistakably serious. He asked Marcus directly to explain the discrepancies. Marcus tried. He stumbled through explanations that sounded plausible in isolation but collapsed under scrutiny. He contradicted himself twice. He referenced conversations that didn't exist. The judge let him speak just long enough to expose the gaps. Then he stopped him. That's when I understood something fundamental. This wasn't about me proving my innocence anymore. That had already happened. This was about the court deciding what to do with people who thought they could weaponize it. The judge dismissed the petition with prejudice. The words landed heavily. Final. He ordered further review. He didn't need to explain what that meant. Everyone in the room knew. My mother reached for me as we stood to leave, her composure finally breaking, fear cracking through the performance. I didn't take her hand. Not because I was angry, but because I was done being pulled back into a story that required my silence to survive. As we walked out, I felt no rush of victory. What I felt was something quieter and far more permanent. Relief. Not because I had won, but because I had told the truth and watched it stand on its own. After the judge dismissed the petition, the room didn't erupt or collapse the way people expect moments like that to. There was no gasp, no dramatic outcry, no cinematic justice. What followed was quieter and more unsettling for the people who had come uncertain of the outcome. Papers were gathered too slowly. Chairs scraped against the floor with forced calm. My family stayed seated a moment longer than necessary, as if movement itself might confirm that something irreversible had just happened. I remained still, not frozen, just finished. The adrenaline everyone talks about never came. What I felt instead was the absence of pressure, like stepping out of a room where the air had been artificially compressed for years. Marcus stood first, stiff and abrupt. His confidence gone but replaced quickly by irritation. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at my lawyer either. His gaze was locked somewhere ahead, as if refusing to acknowledge that the ground beneath him had shifted. His attorney leaned close, whispering urgently, but Marcus shook his head once, sharply, the way people do when they realize the plan they built their identity around has failed. My mother stood next. Her face was pale now, eyes darting around the room, searching for someone to anchor to. She reached for my father, who stood slowly, methodically, like a man recalculating his position in a room that no longer recognized his authority. When they finally turned toward me, there was nothing rehearsed left in their expressions. No script, no narrative, just fear and disbelief. My mother opened her mouth, closed it, then reached for my arm again, her fingers trembling. She said my name, but it didn't sound like the way she used to say it. It wasn't controlling or dismissive. It was pleading. That was new. I stepped back, not dramatically, just enough to create space. That space said everything I needed to say. We walked out without another word exchanged. The hallway outside the courtroom felt longer than it had when we entered. Conversations hummed around us, legal language, hushed voices, the machinery of consequence already in motion. Court officers spoke quietly to Marcus and his attorney, their posture no longer deferential. My parents lingered behind, unsure where to stand now that the structure they relied on had dissolved. My lawyer stayed beside me until we reached the doors. She didn't congratulate me. She didn't ask how I felt. She simply said, "This part is over," and that mattered more than anything else she could have said. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. I stood there for a moment, absorbing the fact that the threat that had loomed over my life for months had ended not with chaos, but with clarity. The fallout didn't hit immediately. That's not how it works. Consequences don't explode. They show up in delayed reactions, in unanswered calls, in doors that don't open the way they used to. Over the next few days, silence replaced urgency. Marcus stopped calling entirely. His lawyer didn't follow up. The aggressive certainty that had fueled the petition evaporated overnight, replaced by avoidance. That told me everything. People who believe they're right don't disappear when challenged. People who know they're exposed do. My parents tried a different tactic. My mother left a voicemail that sounded careful, almost fragile, explaining that things had gone too far and no one had intended for it to escalate like this. My father sent a message framed like a closing argument, full of words like misunderstanding, family, legacy, forgiveness. Neither message contained an apology. Neither acknowledged what they had actually done. They were asking for relief, not accountability. I didn't respond. Silence was no longer me shrinking. It was me choosing not to participate in rewriting reality to make them comfortable. Work resumed quickly, and that normalcy grounded me more than anything else could have. Meetings happened. Projects moved forward. My team showed up with the same trust they always had, focused on execution, not drama. That steadiness reminded me why the petition had failed in the first place. The truth had been documented long before it was questioned. Systems built on reality don't panic under scrutiny. Systems built on manipulation do. Slowly, information filtered back to me through channels I hadn't realized were still open. Reviews had been initiated. Questions were being asked that Marcus couldn't deflect. The same confidence that once protected him now worked against him, making every inconsistency stand out. My parents' social circle contracted in subtle but unmistakable ways. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations became strained. The image they had curated for decades couldn't survive exposure to facts. Vanessa wasn't part of this story, but she felt the ripple effects all the same. Without the illusion of control my parents once projected, her entitlement lost its footing. People stopped accommodating. That wasn't justice. It was reality recalibrating. Home life softened. The tension that had lived in my body for years finally released. I slept through the night without rehearsing arguments that might never happen. I stopped bracing for impact every time my phone buzzed. I noticed small things again. Coffee tasted better. Silence felt full instead of heavy. I didn't feel victorious. Victory implies competition. This wasn't a contest I wanted to win. It was a weight I needed to set down. I learned something critical in the aftermath. Betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from people who believe they're entitled to you, your work, your success, your silence. And when you step out of that role, they don't see it as independence. They see it as defiance. My family didn't try to bankrupt me because I failed. They did it because I succeeded without permission. The courtroom wasn't where I proved my worth. It was where their assumptions collapsed under their own weight. And the most powerful part of it all wasn't the judge's decision or the legal dismissal. It was walking away afterward without needing validation from anyone who had tried to destroy me. That was the moment I understood something clearly and permanently. You don't win by destroying the people who tried to take you down. You win by building a life so grounded in truth that their lies can't reach you anymore. In the weeks after the hearing, what unraveled wasn't dramatic, it was procedural, and that made it harder for my family to deny. There were no explosive confrontations or public scenes. Instead, there were emails marked urgent that never got answered, meetings scheduled and quietly cancelled, and a growing awareness that certain doors no longer opened just because my father expected them to. Reputation doesn't collapse all at once. Thins. Phrase. It loses credibility thread by thread. I heard about it indirectly, through people who didn't realize they were delivering updates. Someone mentioned my father's name in a conversation and paused too long afterward. Someone else referred to Marcus's situation in careful language, avoiding details but signaling concern. The tone had shifted from admiration to caution. That shift mattered more than gossip ever could. Marcus tried to regain footing by reframing the loss. He told people the case had been dismissed on a technicality. He implied that the judge hadn't seen the full picture. But the problem with that strategy was timing. The legal review didn't end with dismissal. It expanded. Requests for documentation followed. Then interviews. Then silence where confidence used to be. His certainty became brittle and people noticed. Confidence only works when it's supported by substance. Without it, it sounds defensive. My parents attempted a private reset. My mother sent a message suggesting lunch, neutral ground, just to talk. The wording was deliberate, stripped of accusation, designed to lure me back into conversation without acknowledging what had happened. I read it once and understood exactly what it was. An attempt to regain influence without accountability. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted distance forever, but because I wasn't willing to pretend the ground hadn't shifted. My father tried next, calling late one evening. His voice measured and controlled. He talked about family reputation, about how public conflict damaged everyone involved, about how discretion would benefit us all. He never said my name. He never said he was wrong. He spoke like this was a negotiation between equals, when in reality it was an attempt to reassert hierarchy. I told him calmly that discretion had already been abused, and that my silence was no longer available as a resource. He ended the call quickly. That was the last direct conversation we had. At work, the contrast was stark. While my family scrambled to stabilize their narrative, my company moved forward without disruption. Clients didn't hesitate. Contracts didn't pause. If anything, the scrutiny reinforced trust. Stability under pressure communicates competence better than any press release ever could. My team didn't ask questions. They didn't need explanations. They trusted the systems we had built together, and those systems held. That reinforced something important. The life I had built was resilient not because it was hidden, but because it was honest. I wasn't propped up by favors or protected by illusion. Everything functioned because it was real. Slowly, the emotional residue I had carried for years began to dissolve. I stopped replaying conversations in my head. I stopped anticipating accusations that never came. The vigilance I had mistaken for responsibility finally loosened its grip. I realized how much energy I had spent preparing to be misunderstood. Without that burden, my thoughts felt clearer, my decisions sharper. The sense of safety I had been chasing my entire life didn't arrive through reconciliation or apology. It arrived through distance and truth. I didn't need my family to admit what they had done for me to move forward. Their behavior had already told the story. What surprised me most was how little anger I felt as time passed. Anger requires engagement. I had disengaged. What replaced it was understanding. Not justification, but clarity. My parents had built their identities around control and image. Marcus had built his around entitlement and succession. When my success didn't fit into that framework, it threatened all three. Their response wasn't personal. It was structural. They tried to remove the anomaly rather than examine the system. That realization freed me from wondering what I could have done differently. There was nothing to fix. I wasn't broken. I was incompatible with the story they needed to believe. As weeks turned into months, the legal consequences continued quietly in the background. Nothing public. Nothing explosive. Just processes moving forward the way they do when there's nothing left to obscure. I didn't follow every detail. I didn't need to. My role in it was finished. I had told the truth, documented it, and let it stand. That was enough. The peace that followed wasn't euphoric. It was steady, reliable. I woke up each day without dread. I made plans without calculating who they might upset. I spoke without softening my words in advance. I didn't feel smaller anymore. And that, more than any verdict or dismissal, was the real outcome. When people ask now how I survived what my family tried to do, I don't talk about strength or resilience. I talk about boundaries, about choosing reality over approval, about understanding that some people only love you when you stay inside the limits they set for you. The moment you step outside those limits, they call it betrayal. Call it freedom. What stayed with me long after the legal noise faded wasn't the shock of what my family tried to do, but how ordinary it felt once I stopped romanticizing them. When people hear the outline of the story, they expect rage or devastation. They expect me to talk about sleepless nights or dramatic confrontations. The truth is simpler and more uncomfortable. What hurt most wasn't the attempt to bankrupt me. It was realizing how easily they justified it to themselves. Once I accepted that, the rest fell into place. My parents didn't see themselves as villains. They saw themselves as protectors of order. Marcus didn't see himself as dishonest. He saw himself as correcting an imbalance that threatened his inheritance. In their minds, I wasn't a person with autonomy. I was a variable that had gone out of bounds. That framing explained everything from my childhood to the courtroom. And once I saw it clearly, I stopped trying to argue my way out of it. You can't reason with people who believe your existence is conditional. The more distance I put between us, the more obvious the pattern became. My parents weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because my absence created inconvenience. Their concern surfaced only when control slipped, when the bills piled up, when the narrative cracked, when other people started asking questions they couldn't answer. That distinction mattered. Love doesn't arrive with terms and conditions. Control does. I noticed how differently my body responded to their messages compared to messages from people who genuinely cared. My chest tightened when my parents' names appeared on my phone, not from longing, but from anticipation of pressure. When friends reached out, there was no calculation, no bracing. That contrast taught me something I wish I had learned earlier. Safety isn't about familiarity. It's about consistency. Around my family, I had always been preparing for the next demand. Away from them, I didn't need armor. That realization reshaped how I defined family altogether. Blood ties had kept me loyal long after trust had expired. I had mistaken endurance for virtue and silence for maturity. In reality, those traits had made me convenient. The more capable I became, the more was expected of me. And when my capability turned into independence, it became a threat. That's when the tone shifted from dismissal to hostility. Success without permission unsettles people who rely on hierarchy to feel secure. They don't celebrate it. They try to contain it. The courtroom had simply been the most visible expression of that impulse. I started paying closer attention to how power operates quietly in families like mine. It's rarely enforced through overt cruelty. It's enforced through narratives. Who is responsible? Who is fragile? Who can be relied on? Those roles become self-reinforcing. Once assigned, they're defended aggressively because they keep the system predictable. I had broken predictability. That was the real offense. By stepping outside the role of the quiet, manageable daughter, I had exposed how much labor I had been performing without recognition. And once that labor stopped, everything they relied on began to wobble. That's not cruelty. That's math. I didn't feel guilty for the consequences anymore. Guilt only makes sense when you've done something wrong. Setting boundaries after being exploited isn't wrongdoing. It's correction. I began to see how often people are trained to feel responsible for outcomes they didn't create, especially in families that prioritize image over integrity. My parents had taught me to manage discomfort that wasn't mine. Walking away meant unlearning that reflex. Took time. There were moments when the old instinct surfaced, when I wondered if I should check in, smooth things over, restore calm. But each time I asked myself one question: would reaching out improve honesty or just restore imbalance? The answer was always the same. Silence in this context wasn't avoidance. It was alignment. I aligned my actions with the truth I had already accepted. That truth was simple. People who try to destroy you when you outgrow their control were never invested in your well-being. They were invested in your compliance. Once that distinction became clear, the emotional fog lifted. I stopped explaining myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I stopped defending choices that didn't need approval. I let go of the fantasy that one perfect conversation could repair years of distortion. Some systems don't need repair. They need exit. The peace that followed wasn't passive. It was active and deliberate. I built routines that reinforced my autonomy. I surrounded myself with people who didn't benefit from my self-erasure. I made decisions based on values instead of fear. And slowly, without ceremony, the version of me that had learned to shrink stopped showing up. In her place was someone quieter, steadier, and far less negotiable. That transformation didn't require forgiveness or closure. It required honesty. And honesty, once chosen, tends to simplify everything that follows. There was a strange moment a few months later when I realized my family had stopped being the loudest voice in my head. It didn't happen all at once. There was no clear line where fear ended and freedom began. It showed up in small, almost forgettable ways. I noticed I no longer rehearsed explanations before making decisions. I stopped editing my thoughts mid-sentence, anticipating disapproval that never arrived. I caught myself laughing without immediately scanning the room to see who might be offended or unsettled by it. That was when it hit me. I wasn't recovering from what they did. I was finally living without them in control of the narrative. For years, my internal compass had been calibrated around their expectations. Even when I disagreed with them, even when I felt wronged, I still oriented myself around how my choices would be interpreted back home. That kind of influence doesn't disappear just because contact stops. It dissolves only when you stop granting it authority. The courtroom confrontation had cut the cord legally, but the psychological separation took longer. I had to learn how to trust my own instincts without waiting for validation or punishment. I had to sit with the discomfort of making choices that no one applauded or corrected. That discomfort was the residue of conditioning, not evidence of danger. Once I recognized it, it lost its power. I also began to see my parents' behavior in a wider context. They weren't uniquely cruel or unusually calculating. They were predictable. They operated exactly the way people do when identity is built on hierarchy rather than connection. In their world, someone always had to be above and someone always had to be managed. I had unknowingly played the role of stabilizer for years, absorbing pressure so the structure didn't have to change. When I stepped out of that role, the structure didn't adapt. It retaliated. That pattern shows up everywhere, in families, companies, institutions. People call it loyalty when what they really mean is compliance. They call it concern when what they really want is control. Seeing that pattern made the story less personal and more instructive. I stopped asking why they chose to do what they did and started asking why I stayed as long as I had. The answer wasn't weakness. It was conditioning. I had been rewarded for being agreeable, reliable, low impact. Those rewards felt like love until the moment they were withdrawn. That withdrawal revealed their true function. They were leverage, not care. Understanding that rewired how I interpreted my past. I stopped viewing my endurance as proof of moral strength and started seeing it as unpaid labor. Emotional labor. Reputational labor. Silence as service. Once framed that way, the guilt evaporated. You don't feel guilty for quitting a job that never paid you. You feel relief. That reframing also changed how I approached relationships moving forward. I became far less impressed by intensity and far more attentive to consistency. Grand gestures stopped meaning much to me. What mattered was how people behaved when there was nothing to gain. Did they listen without correcting? Did they show up without being needed? Did they respect boundaries without pushing back? Those criteria filtered my world quickly. Some people drifted away. Others stepped closer. I didn't chase either outcome. I let alignment do the work. Occasionally, information about my family still reached me, usually filtered through someone else's curiosity. I learned that my parents framed the situation as tragic misunderstanding, that Marcus positioned himself as the victim of betrayal. None of that surprised me. Narratives are how people protect themselves from responsibility. I no longer felt the urge to counter those stories. Anyone who accepted them without question was not someone I needed access to my life. Truth doesn't require defense when your life reflects it. The most unexpected outcome of all this was how ordinary peace felt once it arrived. It wasn't euphoric. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't announce itself. It was just the absence of dread, the absence of monitoring, the absence of self-erasure. I woke up without tension in my jaw. I went to sleep without replaying conversations. I made plans without contingency strategies. That baseline calm made me realize how much chaos I had normalized growing up. What I once called family closeness had actually been constant emotional surveillance. What I once called responsibility had been fear of fallout. Removing myself from that environment didn't make me colder. It made me clearer. Clear about who I was. Clear about what I deserved. Clear about the fact that love does not require you to be smaller to survive. Looking back, I understand now why the judge's question had been so destabilizing for them. It wasn't just that their legal argument collapsed. It was that an authority figure outside the family hierarchy had seen through the story they told themselves. That kind of exposure is terrifying to people who rely on narrative control. For me, it was liberating. It confirmed something I had felt but never trusted enough to name. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't ungrateful. I was simply no longer willing to disappear for their comfort. And once that choice was made, everything else followed naturally. Distance, clarity, ease. Not because they changed, but because I did. The longer I stayed detached, the clearer it became that what my family lost wasn't just leverage over me. It was the version of reality they had relied on to feel righteous. For years, they had positioned themselves as disciplined, principled, and justified in every choice they made. My quiet compliance had reinforced that story. When I stopped participating, the narrative didn't just weaken, collapsed inward. I noticed it in the way third parties spoke to me now, more cautiously, more curiously. People who had once accepted my parents' version of events without question started asking what had actually happened. Not aggressively, gently, as if something in the air had shifted and they were trying to orient themselves. I didn't launch into explanations. I answered honestly when asked and stopped there. I learned that restraint is powerful when you're no longer trying to convince anyone. The truth doesn't need decoration, just needs space. My parents, meanwhile, were struggling with something they had never faced before. A loss of authority without a clear villain to blame. They couldn't frame me as irresponsible anymore. They couldn't claim concern without scrutiny. Their attempts to regain control grew quieter, less direct, because direct confrontation risked exposure. That silence was not peace on their end. It was uncertainty. People who build their identity on being right don't know how to function when certainty evaporates. Marcus felt it most sharply. Without the courtroom as a weapon, his confidence had nowhere to land. He drifted from project to project, explanation to explanation, trying to restore the image of inevitability that had once followed him effortlessly. But inevitability only exists when no one questions it. Once questioned, it requires proof. And proof was something he no longer had access to. I didn't take pleasure in watching this unfold. That surprised me. I had expected some sense of satisfaction or vindication. Instead, I felt distance. Emotional distance, the kind that allows you to observe without absorbing. Their struggles were no longer my responsibility to interpret, fix, or soften. That separation was the real victory. I also noticed how my own sense of identity shifted without the constant contrast to them. For most of my life, I had defined myself in opposition. The reasonable one, the stable one, the quiet achiever. Those labels had been useful, but they were still reactive. Without my family's gravitational pull, I had space to define myself positively instead of defensively. I wasn't strong because I endured. I was capable because I chose deliberately. That distinction changed how I spoke about myself and how I made decisions. I stopped underplaying my achievements out of habit. I stopped assuming my success would make others uncomfortable. I stopped apologizing for occupying space. Those changes weren't loud. They showed up in tone, posture, pacing. People responded differently. Not because I demanded respect, but because I no longer signaled that it was negotiable. Occasionally, guilt tried to resurface, dressed up as responsibility. I would catch myself wondering if I should reach out, if distance had gone on long enough, if maybe this was the moment to extend an olive branch. Each time I traced the impulse back to its source. It wasn't compassion. It was conditioning. The old reflex to stabilize discomfort, even when it wasn't mine. Recognizing that stopped the guilt in its tracks. Compassion doesn't require self-sacrifice. Especially not repeated self-sacrifice for people who mistake it for entitlement. I didn't close the door forever. I simply stopped holding it open. That distinction mattered. If my family ever wanted real contact, it would require honesty, accountability, and respect for boundaries. None of those things could be negotiated indirectly. Until then, distance was the healthiest option for everyone involved. whether they recognized it or not. As time passed, the story people told about me changed. I wasn't the reckless daughter anymore. I wasn't the difficult one. I was the one who walked away. Some people admired it. Others found it uncomfortable. That discomfort told me more about them than about myself. Walking away threatens people who rely on proximity to validate their own choices. It reminds them that staying is not the only option. I didn't evangelize my decision. I lived it. And living it quietly proved more powerful than any argument ever could. The question the judge asked that day continued to echo, not because of its legal impact, but because of what it symbolized. An external authority had interrupted a private system of distortion. That interruption didn't just protect me legally. It validated a truth I had been carrying alone for years. When systems are built on manipulation, they collapse the moment transparency enters the room. I took that lesson with me into every area of my life. I became allergic to environments that relied on silence to function. I trusted consistency over charisma. I valued clarity over approval. The result wasn't isolation. It was alignment. The people who remained in my life did so without conditions. They didn't need me smaller, quieter, or grateful for scraps. They met me where I was. That, more than anything else, confirmed I had made the right choice. The courtroom had been the catalyst, but the transformation was internal. I hadn't just escaped an attempted betrayal. I had exited a system that required my disappearance to survive. And once I understood that, there was no temptation to return. By the time a year had passed, the story no longer lived in my body the way it once had. It existed as memory, not tension. That distinction mattered more than I expected. Trauma lingers when it stays unprocessed, looping through your nervous system as vigilance and doubt. What surprised me was how completely my nervous system recalibrated once I stopped exposing it to the source of harm. Distance didn't numb me. It regulated me. I could feel it in the smallest things. How my shoulders rested instead of creeping upward. How my breathing slowed naturally instead of catching when my phone buzzed. How decisions came from preference instead of defense. That change told me something important. I hadn't been broken. I had been overloaded. And once the overload was removed, my system did exactly what healthy systems do. Stabilized. I stopped needing closure conversations. I stopped wondering if there was a way to phrase things better, softer, clearer. The courtroom had already delivered the only closure that mattered. Not because the judge validated me, but because the truth had been spoken in a room where manipulation couldn't survive. Everything after that was just emotional debris settling. My parents never offered a real apology. That used to bother me in theory. In practice, it became irrelevant. Apologies only matter when they come with insight and change. Without those, they're just another attempt to control the narrative. I learned to recognize the difference quickly. Any message that centered their pain without acknowledging their actions wasn't remorse. It was discomfort. I didn't owe them relief from that. Marcus faded from my awareness almost entirely. Not because I tried to forget him, but because there was nothing left to engage with. His identity had been built in contrast to mine, and once I stopped participating in that contrast, there was no friction left to sustain it. Rivalry needs proximity. Without it, it collapses into noise. I realized then how much energy comparison consumes, and how peaceful life becomes when you opt out of it. Professionally, things expanded in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not explosively, but sustainably. Opportunities came that aligned with my values, not just my ambition. I said no more often, not out of fear, but out of discernment. I trusted myself to recognize what fit and what didn't. That trust was new. It had been eroded early by constant second-guessing and comparison at home. Rebuilding it took time, but once restored, it became the most valuable asset I had. I noticed how differently people responded to me now. There was less testing, less probing, fewer attempts to establish hierarchy. I wasn't broadcasting boundaries. I was embodying them. That shift changed the dynamic before it even had a chance to form. The people who thrived in my presence were those who didn't need me to be anything other than myself. The ones who didn't drifted away without drama. That sorting felt natural, not forced. I also revisited my past with new eyes. Memories that once felt confusing or painful suddenly made sense. The moments where I had been dismissed, overlooked, or subtly undermined weren't personal failures. They were consistent outcomes of a system that valued control over connection. Seeing that allowed me to release shame I didn't realize I was still carrying. Shame thrives in ambiguity. Clarity starves it. I became gentler with my younger self. Not indulgent, honest. She hadn't stayed because she was weak. She stayed because she was trained to. She believed loyalty was proof of character and that endurance would eventually be rewarded. Letting go of that belief was the real graduation. The courtroom had marked the end of one chapter, but the internal shift marked the beginning of another. I no longer felt compelled to prove anything to anyone who had already decided my role. I didn't need their recognition to validate my reality. I had built something real, sustained it under pressure, and protected it without becoming like the people who tried to take it from me. That mattered. When people ask now if I regret walking away, the answer comes easily. Well, regret implies loss. What I walked away from was never designed to hold me. What I stepped into was a life where my presence wasn't conditional. That trade was not just worth it. It was necessary. The strangest part of everything that followed was how little effort it took to keep going once I stopped trying to hold everything together. For most of my life, forward motion had felt like resistance, like pushing against an invisible force that always wanted to pull me back into compliance. After the courtroom, that resistance disappeared. Not because life became easy, but because it became honest. I no longer had to calculate the emotional cost of my success or dilute my confidence to keep other people comfortable. That freedom didn't make me reckless. It made me precise. I knew what I was building now and why. I paid closer attention to how environments made me feel. If something required me to minimize myself to belong, I declined without explanation. If a relationship depended on guilt, obligation, or fear of fallout, I let it fade. Those choices didn't come from bitterness. They came from discernment. Discernment is what develops when you've seen exactly how far people will go to protect their version of reality. I also stopped romanticizing reconciliation. Society has a way of glorifying forgiveness without accountability, especially when family is involved. I had internalized that pressure for years, believing that being the bigger person meant absorbing harm quietly. Letting go of that belief felt like shedding a heavy coat I didn't realize I was still wearing. Forgiveness, I learned, is not an obligation. It's an outcome. It happens naturally when harm is acknowledged and patterns change. Without those conditions, forgiveness becomes another form of self-erasure. I wasn't interested in that anymore. My parents continued living their lives without me at the center of them, and for the first time that felt appropriate. They made choices. They lived with outcomes. That separation didn't make me cold. It made me grounded. I could hold complexity without stepping back into chaos. I could acknowledge that they were flawed humans without excusing what they had done. Both things could be true, and neither required my participation. Marcus attempted to reach out once, months later, in a way that felt more curious than apologetic. He framed it as wanting to clear the air, to put things behind us. I read the message carefully and recognized the subtext immediately. Clearing the air meant restoring ambiguity. Putting things behind us meant erasing consequences. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I understood the cost of reopening that door. Some conversations aren't meant to be had. They exist only to reset the power balance in favor of the person who benefits most from forgetting. That wasn't going to be me again. Instead, I invested my energy where it mattered. I strengthened the relationships that had proven themselves steady under pressure. I built routines that supported my nervous system rather than draining it. I allowed myself to enjoy success without scanning for backlash. That enjoyment felt unfamiliar at first, almost illicit, like I was breaking an unspoken rule. Over time it became normal. And normality, I discovered, is one of the most radical things you can reclaim after growing up in dysfunction. I also noticed how my story began to resonate with others once I stopped trying to soften it. People came to me quietly, sharing their own experiences of family betrayal, legal intimidation, financial manipulation. They weren't looking for advice. They were looking for confirmation that what they sensed was real. I didn't give them scripts or strategies. I told them the truth. That clarity costs you people who rely on confusion to maintain control. But it also attracts people who value integrity. The balance shifted naturally. Looking back, the judge's single question felt less like a turning point and more like a mirror. It reflected the truth I had already lived but hadn't trusted enough to stand on publicly. Once that truth was spoken in a room that demanded evidence, everything else followed. The fear dissolved. The doubt lost its footing. What remained was something quiet and unshakable: self-trust. And once you have that, there is very little anyone can take from you. The real ending didn't come with a verdict or a headline. It arrived quietly, the way lasting truths usually do, after everything loud had finished collapsing. One morning, I realized I hadn't thought about my family in days. Not in anger, not in vigilance, not even in analysis. They had simply stopped occupying space in my mind. That was how I knew the chapter had closed. When harm no longer defines your thoughts, healing has already taken root. I didn't feel triumphant. Felt steady. The kind of steady that comes from alignment rather than effort. My life no longer required performance. I wasn't explaining myself, justifying boundaries, or waiting for permission to exist fully. I had built something real, protected it under pressure, and walked away without becoming hardened or cruel. That mattered to me more than any apology ever could. My parents never publicly acknowledged what they had done. Marcus never admitted wrongdoing. The narrative they told themselves likely still exists somewhere, revised just enough to preserve their self-image. I made peace with that. Not because it was fair, but because it was predictable. People who rely on control rarely surrender it voluntarily. They adjust the story instead. I no longer needed their version of events to validate my reality. The truth had already done its work. What surprised me most was how ordinary happiness felt once I stopped carrying what wasn't mine. Mornings unfolded without tension. Evenings ended without rehearsal. Success didn't feel dangerous anymore. I no longer feared outgrowing the people closest to me, because I understood that growth doesn't destroy healthy connections. It exposes unhealthy ones. And exposure, while painful, is clarifying. I didn't lose a family. I lost an illusion. The illusion that love requires silence. That loyalty means endurance without reciprocity. That strength is proven by how much you're willing to absorb. Letting go of those beliefs changed everything. I became someone who chose deliberately instead of reflexively. Someone who trusted consistency over promises. Someone who understood that boundaries are not walls, they're filters. They let in what's safe and keep out what isn't. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. When people try to destroy you for stepping outside the role they assigned you, it's not because you failed them. It's because you succeeded without permission. And that kind of success is threatening only to those who benefit from your silence. Walking away didn't make me heartless. Made me whole. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need vindication. I needed freedom. And I claimed it the moment I stopped shrinking to make room for people who never planned to grow with me.